Monday's main Champ and Chump. We'll get to our Champ and Chump nominations today at 10:35. 248-539-9797. Scott, I think what we did is I was reading about what San Francisco gave up, and they were saying their top pitching prospect, a young arm they have, and their number one pick from last year. Would you move the Tigers' top? Would you have moved the Tigers' top pitching prospect and the number one pick from last year for Rafael Devers? I don't know if you would have needed to, because I feel like that's significantly more than what San Francisco gave up. But you'd have to beat what they gave up to get the deal done. So what would you think of the cost of getting him to Detroit?
Well, I think, and you laid it out before the break, right?
Yes.
I don't think it's comparable, and I think you understand that. It's just you're trying to find a comp.
Yep.
So you're looking at, okay, here's a top pitching prospect and a first round pick from last year, and that's what you're going to go with, and I understand that. But the reality is that their top pitching prospect, who's pitched in the major leagues for each of the last couple seasons, has not done well at the majors. In the minors, he was a strikeout machine.
You're talking about San Francisco's guy, Harrison.
Harrison had 490 strikeouts in 300 innings pitched. It's an insane amount of strikeouts. His ERA was over 3. Obviously there's a reason he was a good pitching prospect, but he hasn't figured it out at major league level just yet. The first pick from last year that they sent was a kid from Florida State. Was that it? Tibbs. He is he's highly regarded, but he's not a top 100 prospect in baseball.
No.
So it's tough to say, match that up with Jackson Jobe and Bryce Rayner when Bryce Rayner's the Tigers' third-rated prospect overall, and he's, in the top 50 or whatever he is. And then you got Jackson Jobe, who was he the number one prospect in all of baseball going into...
Number one pitching prospect, yeah. But he's also hurt now,
yes.
which decreases his value.
Yeah.
So, and you probably have to significantly beat San Francisco's deal to keep Devers in the American League, but it would be costly for sure.
It would have to be costly, right? Because you're talking about Rafael Devers, who's an all-star player. He's really good. Would I have given up Rayner and Jobe? No. Would I have given up like Jobe, or would I have given up Tyron Lorenzo and something? Yeah, but I would not. Bryce Rayner to me he's almost a do not touch.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't want Rafael Devers personally. I value we've done this for years. One big difference we have is I value defense in baseball more than you do. You love the bat. It's 8 years, $250 million left on the contract for a player who I think is at 28 years old is probably looking at a lot of back end bad years where you're overpaying for him. And I think what it comes down to is I think the perfect third base option is out there in Eugenio Suarez. I mean, I watched the Padres Diamondbacks this weekend, and Suarez launched one to dead center up that tall wall above the yellow line into that like balcony area that they have for fans at that ballpark in Arizona. I just don't know that Arizona's going to pull the plug. I mean, there's so many trade rumors going on right now, and I think so many of them are unrealistic because there's so many teams that are in playoff positions. We've talked about Bo Bichette. Toronto's in the playoffs. Like, why? I know they might lose him for nothing, but that doesn't mean you don't try to make a postseason run. I can't imagine. I mean,
some teams would.
It happens.
It has happened.
But if we're doing a talk show in Toronto, and people are saying, "Hey, Bo Bichette is getting shopped around," I'm like, dude, I'm not trading Bo Bichette. We got a chance to win something here. 100 times I would not make that trade out of 100. I'm trying, I would be against it if Doug Karsch were doing the show on, the ticket in Toronto.
Well, I guess I'd be against it if I knew that Bo Bichette wasn't going to, if he was going to re-sign with Toronto. If you had a chance to sign him, then you just sign him. If you have no chance, trade him.
I guess.
You're not one of the better teams in baseball. Okay, you might be in the playoffs, but you have to be honest about yourself with your team and your expectations and what you think is going to happen. So is Toronto going to compete with the Yankees? Are they going to compete with the Tigers? Are they going to compete, with Seattle with that roster? Probably not.
If a couple years from now the Tigers are in the same position and they've got Skubal still and they haven't, and he hasn't re-signed and we're approaching the trade deadline, but they're a playoff team, I'm trying to make the playoffs.
Well, if they're a wild card team, it's different. than if they're a best team in baseball, which is what the Tigers are.
I mean, I guess you've got examples of wild card teams that have won World Series, though. And in baseball and short series, anything can happen.
Yeah.
But look, we're different on this one. I wouldn't be trading Bo Bichette if I were in Toronto.
Yeah, that's why I say you have to give yourself an honest evaluation of what your team really is. So it's difficult to do that. Now, I mean, the thing about this is when a big trade happens, like Devers going to the Giants, everybody puts on their GM cap, and what would you do? And it's kind of fun to think about that with the Tigers because they have such, I don't know if I want to call it an embarrassment of riches with the prospects that they have and young players they have, but it is, right? I mean, you could think about that. Would Jace Young and others have gotten it done? You know, could you deal Colt Keith and get something like that done? Yeah, I'm a big fan of Devers' bat, and like I said, you do value defense more than I do. I value defense not as much as you do, so that's fair to say. But when you have a bat like that, and you kind of put up with it, or you don't need to play him at third base, you could use him as a DH. That's the brilliance of baseball now is that everybody's got the DH, but yeah, might have to make some of those cold hard decisions. Adding someone like that to the roster means someone has to come off the roster. You're probably not just dealing for prospects. So if that's the case, I mean, I would have tried to find something that would have made sense. And if it ends up being too painful, then you walk away. Your idea of Suarez, it was something we talked about last week. I'm way open to that. Yeah.
That's the one. And that to me is perfect. Right-handed bat power. And I think the path to getting him out of Arizona will be there. We need Arizona to fade a little bit because they kind of feel like they got a shot here, and that's a team that wasn't. I have to go back and look at the record the year they made it to the World Series because I don't think they were that dangerous during the regular season. They just got in and then got hot, and they're not that far removed from that, so they might be less compelled to break it up. Well, but at some point they gotta make a decision, and I haven't looked at the latest. I think they're 4.5 out of the playoffs. But
we're talking about, adding hitting to this team right now because Devers was just traded.
Yes.
So we're asking that question. But over the weekend, when the weekend comes and goes,
dude,
that is that the issue?
I mean, when I referenced storm clouds, it wasn't the everyday lineup.
No,
when I referenced storm clouds. To me, it's the bullpen.
Is Pinky going to derail this team for a little bit?
I don't know. But, you can't keep having guys go down to the minors, go down with injuries, and not eventually expect a drop-off in performance. And, I'm just so sick of talking about guys getting hurt. I feel like this goes back to essentially September, where a major through line for the topics have been injuries. The Lions, Jaden Ivey, now this team.
We're going with the Red Wings. That Dylan Larkin was banged up after the Four Nations Cup.
It's standard operating procedure that guys are going to get hurt.
Yep.
Is there something going on with Detroit teams? Because, when you start listing off the Tiger stuff, you go, this list is way longer. You don't realize as it's happening. Somebody else gets hurt. Somebody else gets hurt. You get used to life without them. Team keeps winning. And then you look down and you go, how many of these guys have been hurt? I'm just getting fed up with it. But, all right, 248-539-9797. Let's get into the bullpen stuff over the weekend because it was not great. The Devers thing, look, if you feel like they missed out, and you would have paid a more of a price than San Francisco did, maybe not as much as Job and Rayner, but that's what they got from San Francisco. Their top pitching prospect who had already been in the bigs, and their number one pick from last year. Detroit's are both better, so. But you kind of have to beat their offer. That's a lot. So it would be probably something less than that, but still. Would you have made a significant investment to get Rafael Devers, or is something else more appealing? Because we could sit here and say, well, this is more appealing, that's more appealing. But that doesn't mean that guy's for sale. Like Suarez might never hit the open market as much as we want him. 248-539-9797. We'll have our Champ and Chump nominations today at 10:35 here on 97.1 The Ticket.